Good morning on Zoom. Thanks for joining us. Happy to be here for our virtual coffee at 10. Let me introduce you to our guest. I'm here with Mars Dupay. Mars is tuning in to us from Bowling Green, Ohio. I'm new to Mars's work. She has an installation and a collage in our Open Doors exhibition, and her piece took first prize with our awards juror Patrick Earl Hammy. And it really is a fascinating installation that Mars will have a chance to share with us, and we can learn a little bit more about the piece. But I was really taken with Mars's work for the range of material and imagery and symbolism. So we're going to get a chance to hear what Mars has to say about what's going on in her head in the studio and how that comes through in the work. And by way of a little bit of context, Mars is a teaching professor at Bowling Green State University. She received her MFA in 2D Studies and Collage there, and has a bachelor's from Marietta College in Studio Art and Art History. So your teaching specialization, Mars, I see, is in collage and assemblage. You teach a variety of classes, so we might get a chance to talk about that a little bit. But it's just, I'm really grateful, I guess, that you participated in the show, and I had a chance to get introduced to your work, and I'm really excited to start this conversation and find out a little bit more about what goes on in your studio practice. So with that, a virtual welcome, Mars.
Hi. Thanks, Liz. It's kind of a dangerous question, what goes on in my head.
Yeah, I know. I won't start there. We'll start a little more.
Oh, good.
Why don't you start off and just tell me, Mars, how did you get started creatively? Were you always interested in making? When did that start to become more serious? Let's start there.
Well, I guess I think I've always been making, but I never thought it was art. I grew up in a family that kind of did dumpster diving and grabbed all kinds of essentially crap and remade things out of it. So my dad's a mechanic and my mom teaches music. And so we had she taught music out of the house. And so we had a lot of people always showing up that were students. So all these little kids were always running around. And so we would just involve them with all of the crap. I grew up on a farm, so there was a lot of stuff. And my dad, well, both my parents actually are kind of hoarders. Anyway, my dad would have lots and lots and lots of stuff. And so, and my mom sewed all our clothes and everything. So we had materials. So it was not uncommon to like just go into a closet, grab a big bolt of material, and then go out and grab nuts and bolts and a welder and see what we could do. So, when we were kids, it was kind of a free for all. We were those kids who like ran with scissors and, whatnot. But the making.
So were all of you creative in that way?
All of us did it. Yeah, all of us did it. It was really a free for all. We kind of, like I said, involved anybody who was around, essentially. But I don't know. My sisters tell me I had weird aspirations because, like, when my aunt taught me how to knit and crochet, the first thing I wanted to do was crochet a chain all the way around the house. And my goal was, I was thinking that winter was coming, and so I could crochet a house cozy to keep us warm. So I think my kind of wanting to make and go kind of to a strange place with it, maybe slightly different from the rest of the people in my family. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it was always coming from just kind of an experimental place. It wasn't about function in that case. Well, I guess the cozy was sort of.
The cozy was functional, and we got to build our own playground out of crap too. So, but I think part of it was for me. It was always there was the kind of like this what if question that was just I don't know, maybe sometimes an odd question, or perhaps even just kind of storytelling oriented. I was the kid who always was just like, I'm going to write a little play and then kind of boss all my sisters into putting it on with me. And, we'll make the costumes out of everything we can find. Yeah, that kind of thing, that kind of play. But the collaging and that kind of move into that kind of happened in college, because I had a teacher who wanted us to make collages to experience kind of image juxtaposition, right? But they were just the beginning works for making paintings. The collage wasn't a finished thing. And I was also studying art history at the time. And I had had several teachers who told me that I was talented, but that I was a woman and therefore I should just probably just get married so somebody could support me so I could make art. And I got a little offended by that. that was, the path I was being encouraged to take. And so I cut up my art history book and took all the female figures out of the positions of display, sexuality, subservient roles, such as the Madonna, feeding the Christ child, all those kinds of things, and started making collages that moved them from those roles into other places, because it was almost like a political and personal act. I just didn't want them in that place anymore. It was like, they deserve to have backstories that are not dictated by this kind of mindset and not. So I kind of went rogue in college in terms of combining my art history and my, I had a love-hate relationship with the Baroque. And so I kind of took on the Baroque masters for a while.
Wow, I can see that in like all of the current work that I've seen of whether it's in person or the digital images. So there's two avenues that I kind of want to go with here. One is just that process and material of it. And then of course I want to dig into that content a little bit, but let's talk about process for a second. Because obviously collage and assemblage totally connects with what you're talking about in your youth. But I also find it interesting within that kind of hierarchy of art and within the college environment and learning your practice and the notion of collage, as you said, being used as a study or a way to put an image together, but it's not the real form.
It's not the real art.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that, especially as an instructor now, like how you look at that process and material as an art form?
Well, for me too, it was like, what do you mean collage isn't real? It just seemed it is. But anyway, I think there was that, kind of way in which collage is integral to the 20th and 21st century. I mean, 90% of modern art wouldn't have happened without collage. And then, of course, all of digital is based on this juxtaposition of imagery and looking for those frictions, if you will, especially for people who are interested in creating fantasy worlds and surreal, all of that, kind of thing. But so when I'm talking with my students, one of the things that struck me was in studying collage, right, that the first impetus in collage was actually people who needed to kind of cover their walls with stuff. I mean, it might have been, people in the 19th century who were just, I can't afford wallpaper, and so they're cutting things and putting them up. And so there's lots of starts to this that actually start from a practice of just wanting imagery around you and having some kind of way in which you're connecting that imagery, but you're forcing that imagery into other connections into space where you're living, right? And of course, in modernism, that really, takes off. However, the main impetus with collage seemed to be to kind of always focus on the fragment. And that's where it kind of bothered me also, was that, yes, there's this really cool kind of idea of discussion with the fragment, breaking apart our expectations of the cohesive whole that modernism tries to bring forward, right? But I also just enjoyed the collagists who were questioning that fragmentation. So for example, I really like Hannah Hoesch's work. Hoesch, I can never pronounce her name. Max Ernst, those folks, Dorothea Tanning, which are, well within the surreal and Dadaist range, where they're using collage as a political social tool, right? But then I'm also aware that there's lots of voices that get left out of that, because being represented as a fragment means that somehow you're still not part of this whole somehow that we're all in together, right? So there's something at some point in my career, I just kind of decided that part of this is just definitely about the processes of othering, that we use fragmented imagery to talk about how we are othered ourselves through comparison to whatever hierarchy, whatever hegemony, whatever normal that is or ideal that is. And we also use it as a tool for those of us who are othered or are told all the time that we don't belong in some particular way. And that reclaiming that fragment and creating another whole out of it is a powerful tool. So I think in postmodern practice in particular, when I'm talking to students, that in postmodern practice, that ability to reconstruct, question the context from which things come, put them in a new context that now asks more questions than it answers, allows us to have the conversations that can sometimes be the difficult conversations.
Absolutely. Maybe, Mars, do you want to share some images now?
Sure.
Those in attendance have a little bit of a visual inclination of what this is looking like.
Would you prefer I start with some collages since we were talking about that?
Yeah, let's start there. That seems logical.
Alrighty. Let me see, pull this up. All right, so I'm just going to take us to my webpage so that it just is, I think, a little easier to locate stuff on it. Is there a piece in particular, Liz, you'd like me to talk about?
No, I mean, I think if you just go to your collages and pull one up, we can talk maybe about how you're thinking about that fragmentation and wholeness.
Okay, cool.
Context that might just be a visual representation of some of the ideas you were sharing.
Okay, I think that this one might be a good one for talking about those particular ideas. Back up here. Okay, so this piece is called Between a Rock and a Hard Place. Oftentimes my ideas come from, well, reading. I read a lot. At this point, I was reading a lot of Louise Erdrich and Hogan, I can't remember her first name right now, but some Native American writers, Silko. And I had been raised Catholic and was aware of the history of Christianity in taking Native American children and putting them into schools, separating them from their communities and separating them from what is important in their culture, right? I will preface this by also saying that my maternal grandmother was an out and out hoarder. So I had access to materials and especially imagery from the 1920s through the 1970s that I essentially inherited from her. So a lot of this imagery, what happens is I cut it out of the magazines and I just kind of put them in places. So they develop new context because I just kind of grab imagery, kind of throw it on the floor, play with it. It's kind of like a kid, you know, I'm just playing with stuff. And I'm waiting for things to kind of create a moment that is a question or a tension. So in this particular collage, I think some of that tension often comes from what I would call a presence absence, where something is actually there, of course, but the combination of the two things somehow forms a something else that also makes you aware of what is missing at the same time as what is present. So one of the things I had was access to a lot of imagery of old cash registers. So I cut a bunch of those out and was playing with those. And as I was messing with them, I had some imagery of moccasins. And I had cut them apart. So this is from one moccasin, this is from a different moccasin. So these are separate moccasin things. As I was playing with them, and one of the reasons I wanted to use the cash registers because they say amount purchased, and this registers the amount of your purchase. So there's that notion of the objectification of this other culture, but also the taking with respect to a kind of not necessarily totally agreed upon commercial transaction, if you will. Anyway, one of the things I was interested in is as soon as I put the shoe there was the way it looked like the cash register was screaming, or that the cash register had a gaping maw that could continue to consume in some way. Another thing that I enjoyed about the juxtapositions was the beadwork that formed these symbolic flowers and growth that are essentially digging into the ground where there's all this scrub, this area that is, you know, not totally barren, but not flourishing in particular ways. And then the juxtaposition of that to the Europeanized floral designs that are etched in the metal of the cash register. And then oftentimes, again, I'm pulling things from multiple places, but the panel right here, I replaced with this jewelry design and then the cameo, because I wanted the European cameo female figure to be looking back at that. Same thing here. This is a European miniature painting with a skull cut out and part of a Mardi Gras design within framing, a wooden cross from another totally different source. You know, things like that. These are African beadwork. Anyway, as I'm collaging, I'm building up layers. So within the underlayers, what's happening, it's hard to tell in on a screen, but when you see the collages, they have kind of a top topography. Underneath, what I discovered fairly early on in my collaging career is that if you have text or dark imagery on the back of something that's light, that as soon as you glue it, everything shows through and it's backward. So I'm gluing darker pieces underneath before I glue anything else light on the top. Also, there's only so much of a size that can be glued before it starts ripping apart, wrinkling, because you basically only have one shot. You know, I'm using original materials. So what I started doing then was cutting the underlayers so that they echoed the imagery that's on the top. So in the sky areas and a lot of the collages, you'll see echoes of the shapes and symbols that are showing up in the imagery, or you may see things that look a little bit like speech bubbles or things where the landscape is kind of, you know, almost talking back to what's going on. Here, the other shoe is stuck between the rock and the, and here we see a little tiny rock stuck between two rocks, this on a little daisy growing from underneath this rock, being held by a young child with the kind of, you know, little schoolgirl, Mary Jane, you know, proper way a female is supposed to sit with her legs kind of crossed, you know, kind of, you know, the thing we expect from an old crocheting magazine that my grandmother had. Probably, I would guess maybe 1970s based on the clothing, maybe 60s. And then another child's face, the ram's horns and the headdress, another poor little cash register, the book, and of course, a place that is kind of a difficult place to be in, per se. So.
Yeah, it's so loaded and so interesting. And to think of all of the resources and materials that you're drawing from to put this together. Can you tell me a little bit about building this image? Are you sifting through just piles of magazines and grabbing things as they call to you? Do you sort them out ahead of time and know, oh, I've got this pile of cash register?
Fortunately or fortunately, I have an elaborate filing system.
Okay.
Again, I have so much material, and I have additional friends and people who are just so lovely and keep bringing me magazines and other things with which to continue to cut. And so often what starts to happen is things may be, I'm kind of aware of things that I'm attracted to, you know, lots of objects that call to me, like books and things where I can see stitching and the like. And then there's things that you just kind of sort of need, like, you know, skies and stuff like that. But oftentimes the collages themselves start from this just piece of play. Like I had apprenticed as a cobbler at one point, just to, while I was also kind of modeling for art classes when I was really poor. And and so when I found this whole thing that was just lasts from shoemaking, right? And shoe repair. I was just floored. I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm cutting all these lasts out. I had no idea what I was going to do with them, but it was like, yes, there was something about these feet in this kind of jumping position that it was just like, I'm attracted to this, and who's not attracted to, the red shoes from the Wizard of Oz, right? So, there were certain things that, and this monkey was just a darn sweet. I think this is in a National Geographic, these, these primates. And for me, part of it was just the challenge of cutting it out. It's like I wanted to cut all the little tiny hairs and the little tail, and part of it was just the innocent curiosity of this. This had originally been in a National Geographic where it was reaching up into a window. There was a cat in a window, and it was just reaching to kind of make contact and was curious. And the other two were sitting a little farther away watching the cat. And I was just drawn to the curiosity that they had and the attention that they had. And so anyway, it cut all this stuff out. And it might be that some things go together just because of color. Some things might just go together because, hey, I wonder what happens if, like I had this polyphony old sound machine, early form of a record player, which I'm also attracted to those kinds of things. The machines and mechanics of things, especially of sound, are interesting to me. I had cut out the kind of, old timey painting that would have been decorative, that it would have been there. And I don't know, tried probably 1,000 things, just kind of putting things underneath it. And at some point when the red shoes were underneath, one of the things I loved was just the wood grain that kind of went through, and it repeats itself in the reflections in the shoes. And it's like, yep, it belongs there and we're moving on, kind of thing. So some of this comes from a kind of, I want to say, they exist then in these, for lack of a better term, little places. So let me pull this back up here.
While you're pulling images up, I just want to make a comment. We do one of Mars's collages on display in the galleries. And I think, you mentioned a little bit ago about the prevalence of collage, especially now in a digital environment. And we're looking at this piece digitally, and we can get a sense of the quality of it and certainly the formal elements of it. But what really blows you away when you see these in person is just how meticulous those edges are and how consistent the surface is. And thinking about these as a physical object, I find really fascinating, Mars. I don't know, a comment on that, the physicality of them, I guess.
I think that's one of the things I'm drawn to, because it would actually be so much easier to do these digitally. There's something about
you can use the same element over and over, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I lucked out because, again, my grandmother was a hoarder. So I actually have 3 versions of these hands from a watch ad because she had 3 copies. Because she had 3 copies of the magazine, right?
That's
but
great.
There's something, like you said, about the kind of physicality of cutting a tiny thing and then looking for its relationship to something next to it. And then there's the puzzle solving. As soon as I put something down, it's like, oh, look how this echoes across here, because they were all taken from the same image, right? They've been rearranged slightly, but they have the same reflection. But as soon as this little ball thing goes right here, all of a sudden you're aware of this and how it echoes the ball and opens up and has the same kind of shape that the thumb has. And, the technicality of putting together, quite frankly, is nerve-wracking, because, again, single shot. I've got one, unless I have 3 versions from my grandma. But the papers are from different magazines and they all react differently. They're different weights, they're different colors, they're different. Yeah. And so like in this case with the thumb, I think you can actually see some of the wrinkles and undercutting that's happening to kind of mask some of what's going on underneath, to raise up the layers so that by the time this thumb gets put on the top, I'm not dealing with whatever happened back here in this section. Yeah.
So, and working with these found materials, are you worried about the lasting nature of them or the archival quality? We have a question here in our Q&A about what glue you're using and
Yeah.
varnishing them. Can you tell us a little bit about those concerns?
Yeah, I can. I had originally started, when I started collage, I was using, the traditional, white glues and everything. And I was experiencing problems because, again, I had materials that from the 1920s, and I even had some stuff from the 19th century, older printed materials. And the glues react differently, with the papers, they cause it. So what I did is I switched to the acrylic gloss medium. My theory here is I'm encasing everything in plastic, essentially, acrylic, so that it freezes it at that moment of whatever deterioration it's currently in. It's essentially plastic wrapping that particular piece of paper. So I'm using that as the glue, as the connector. And then I switch over to the matte medium to get rid of the gloss and the shine. There's probably in any given collage, anywhere between 25 to 80 layers, maybe, if I had to guess. And so these are often like puzzle piece kind of cut layers. So what I'm doing is putting glue in the space where it's going to go down, glue underneath the piece, put it down as quickly as I can, wax paper over top, squeegee, get the glue out, use my finger to kind of wipe the rest of the acrylic in as best I can. I'm using thinner brushes and small brushes to make cross strokes. So when you see these, they kind of have surfaces that are not unlike paintings because you can start to see all the brush stroke work. And then areas that need adjusting. So for example, everything rips, everything tears, it just happens as you're making it, everything wrinkles. So what I decided to do was try to make the wrinkles make sense in the image. So I'm just working with the tactility of it. If you're going to see a wrinkle or a cut right here, which is here's one of the few cuts you can actually see, it's actually physically part of moving your eye, part of whatever is happening in the image. If you can see the wrinkle, it somehow is an echo of something else that's already happening in that same area. If you're going to have to see, I had to make a bizarre cut or a bizarre wrinkle, again, it's something that seems somehow to our eye somewhat logical, that it's there. And to some degree. And then there's colored pencil to kind of repair wherever something fell apart. Like I think right in here, that little area right there, it fell apart while I was gluing or whatever. So that's a lot of little colored pencil dots to just kind of make it match back in.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, so the pieces are just so well designed. When you think about the sensitivity that you just expressed to finding those repeated design elements and moving the form. And then of course, I don't know why I hadn't thought about the way that the cuts contribute to the mark making and the textured surfaces. And color is also something that I feel like you use really sensitively. Are you manipulating color with your found objects? Are you adding colored pencil or paint as a design tool, not just a tool for reparation?
It depends on the collage. I'm trying to find one where I did much more colored pencil work. I think this one has a lot more in it. Yeah, here you can see that almost the entire bottom area has been reworked with colored pencil to pick up the color tonalities that are in other spaces of the piece. Yeah, so picking up these blues and whatnot and bringing them down here. These orange spaces are, picked up from the shoes. This whole area right here also, there's quite a bit of colored pencil to make and you can see the colored pencil, I think, better on the spoon even right in here. the imagery, because it comes from so many sources, obviously the coloration is an issue, right? So oftentimes, like maybe this gold area might be just a little too greenish yellow, a little too harsh, right? So adding those peaches and pink tones, and then adding some of that greenish gold that's actually down in here and pulling it up here, again, to just kind of help. And of course, again, there's ripping and tearing anyway, so going back in with the colored pencil to grab a little bit of the color that's from another space. I think the hardest parts are, like, I think you could see quite a bit of colored pencil right here too, because the value of this and the value of the thing behind it were so close, it got kind of muddy there. It didn't feel like the spoon could be spanning over across that little hole there. And so you can see the buildup of like a dark cherry purple and, some red and some oranges and, and then you can see the little like scribbles of the blues kind of floating on top. That's all colored pencil.
One more process question before I ask you some about what your themes and ideas are. So I feel funny asking this because this is usually a standard question that I get from my audience, but how long, Mars, do you spend?
Oh God.
You knew it was coming. It comes all the time. How long
oh, it's a lovely question. I love it. There are only a few collages that come quickly. The majority of these are long periods of time. For example, this one, easy 3 years. Wow. And part of it is because it takes a while for all the pieces to find their way. So like at some point, the head of this child, this little boy here, and this body with the blue-green corset on, ended up together. So, the head was in a whole different file of just bunches of heads and the body was somewhere else. And I was having a play day where I was just making characters. So I was just pulling heads and bodies to see if anybody went together. And the skin tone was close enough. I love just the direct eye contact and the empathy in this child's face. It was just like, I'm just drawn to this face. So I knew I wanted to use it. I had tried it on several other bodies, images, and it wasn't working. And so it was just, I really wanted to use this one. So I was really motivated to find something, right? So at some point, these two went together, even though the scale differences are really bizarre on them. Now, the issue here is that this arm on this female figure was actually probably longer, was probably way out here. So the arm had to be shortened. So I had to cut the arm. But you'll notice over here, the arm's totally gone. It's not even there any longer, right? So there were things that had to be done to just make this seem to go with this, right? The headdress, it was just a color decision. I had this, this is a Korean pot, a stone Korean pot that looks like this. The eyes inside here, this is from Louise Bourgeois artwork where she has two marble eyes looking out of a stone. And so this is an homage to Louise Bourgeois. This is a Victorian frame that is actually upside down, but when I put it over top of there, it looked like an owl, and I thought, how cool is that? So this whole thing without the feather existed in another place. It was put together, but it was like, I kind of like this. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's a little start, right? The shoe and this were a little start from another thing. I had the I had the gate part and just neurotically cut out all the holes because I knew I wanted to use it, but didn't know what I wanted to do with it. These are all beads from a bigger piece of jewelry. Again, I liked the reflections on them. I cut them out, didn't know what I was going to do with them. So
some days in the studio, is it just cutting?
God, yes, I just love to cut.
Yeah.
I cut a lot, and I cut with scissors primarily. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I just love to cut. Yeah. And so these things are, sometimes they're in like all these different other starts. And then I'll have one of those days where I'm really frustrated and think that, some of this has got to go together. There's just law of averages. Some of it has to happen because I could have like easy, 80 starts, so, you know, places, and, you know, some of it has to go together at some point, right? And so then I just start overlapping these little starts to see if they start to build into something. And so that's why it takes so long. Once they're finally laid out, then they're traced so that I can figure out and plan the layers, because there's so much interweaving of layers.
They're traced. Okay, like on the surface where they're going to go. And I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
We have a question that is actually going to lead us into content, which is where I want to go. So that's great.
Okay.
The question is, your titles are interesting. Do they come first or at the end?
I have to credit my dear friends. Sometimes I have a working title, because quite frankly, I don't know what these things are going to be as I'm making them. I'm kind of just looking at a way in which something isn't in betweenness, something is there, something is missing, you know. Some of it even feels a little bit more color oriented, right? Some just make me laugh as I'm working on them, and I may or may not have a title, right? And I have very dear friends that all study, all, you know, read literature and poetry and are into politics and the world, and just have vast bodies of knowledge. And I basically call upon them. They look at the collages and they like crank out titles, and then we talk about it and we goof around. Some of them comes from us just talking, you know. When I was a kid, I had to take, my mom traded ballet lessons for piano lessons with the next door neighbor. And so I had to, you know, take ballet, and I was a klutz. I still am. I just, you know, trip over myself all the time. And I made several other pieces doing with Degas' Little Dancer. So I had parts of the Little Dancer thing around. And there was just something about the way this thing fit on, when I just placed it over top part of this body of this bird. It was just like, I love that the bird's leg looks like fishnet stocking. This is just too cool. Right. And so the whole thing started coming off of just the tutu, and then, you know, going off of that kind of thing. But essentially many of the titles I really have to credit many of my friends. Some of them come from poetry, as though what only is lost held possibility comes from a poem by Ryan. I can't remember her first name right now. She was poet laureate.
Can you go back to the boy with the shoe and the corset? Let's think about this one for a minute. You had talked a bit about a lot of your work dealing with otherness, and I'm curious about your use of found imagery and the forms and that I'm seeing show up, you know, throughout the works that you're sharing. Can you talk a little bit about how you relate to the idea of objectification and otherness in that way? How are you thinking about that when you're looking through this pile of media and the stories you're telling?
I think the otherness just comes from a sense of what if hybridity, and then what is the power structure that if this comes into being, if these things are put together, what questions does it naturally ask or challenge within that, and where does it reach our assumptions about something? For me here, this little boy's face was from a Colors of Benetton ad, and it was a Palestinian couple of two Palestinian children, a little boy and a little girl, and the boy had on a shirt that was they were on their way to school. He was holding a book, and, you know, the little girl had the veil on and everything. And the Benetton ads were pissing me off, quite frankly, because they were using that otherness of children of war, of ethnicities, even the ways in which the little girl and the little boy were treated differently in terms of gender expectation in the ad. There were so many ways that the ad could raise questions. And of course, my need to remove them from that space, I of course cut them out of that space and used them in different collages, right? For the female body, in the overly sexualized display. Whose body gets to be displayed? How much power do you have in that display, right? Once this young boy's head goes on this female body, for me now it's gender fluidity, trans issues, a kind of otheredness in terms of presentation of gender and sexuality. The looking back is very much a kind of this, we have a tendency to objectify this. So this is looking back at you, is aware that we're there and is present with you and is, okay, I see you too. And I'm here and I'm hoping you can care about me in the state that I am in this place, right? Some of this seems like a moment of in-betweenness to me, because there's a ridiculously large kind of hassock stand kind of thing. And this is made out of obviously large bird wings that I cut from photographs of birds. And so there's the othering and the use of animals in the making of these materials, in the shoe and in the thing. There's a display of the souvenir, the display of how we take someone's otherness, someone else's experience, and we can idolize it. We put it up on a stand and say, here's something that we can possess and feel good about ourselves for possessing, or aspire to, or in some way colonialize, we may not treat it, we think we're treating it with respect, but we may not be treating it with respect in the way in which we are othering it, right? And there's divides, where are we on the side of the divide? Are we somehow contributing to maybe holding that divide up, being partly on one side of it, partly on the other side of it? Again, it's raising questions, I think, more about how these othernesses intersect with each other.
How about you share with us some of the other kinds of work that you create, maybe transitioning to tell us about the piece that we have on display in our galleries?
Okay, happy to do so. This is the piece that is in the show called I Don't Know What to Say, I Don't. I am going to back up to a piece before it because some of the pieces are reused in this, and so you can see kind of the history of what's going on in this piece. In this particular piece, this was made soon after the children are being separated from their parents on the southern US border. And I was really upset, and I'd been making lots of collages, and you can see some of them here. This is in a show. I'd been making lots of collages, and the collages are such a slow process for me. I really enjoy the cutting, but it takes so long for them to kind of come together that I needed something more physical and something that felt tactile. I have a history of working with fibers from my grandmothers and my mom and whatnot. And I started taking wool and acrylic and just stretching it and kind of mixing them together just to feel them. And then I was kind of puffing air into them and turning them into these little gunny sacks, little sacks. From my art history experience, I knew about all of the reliquaries, the collections, and the ways in the medieval times up through the Baroque, the uses of hair to commemorate, or even into the Civil War, the uses of hair to keep a little bit of somebody with you, somebody that you care about, the way in which hair is used in reliquaries as evidence of someone who had existed that we call upon or want to have a connection with for reasons of power, reasons of spirituality, whatever. Anyway, it started to become a whole lot about this hair, these looking like little hairballs as well as little gunny sacks. And I just started making them every day. I was just making them because I needed to deal with my grief, my sadness. I felt powerless. I didn't know what to do. What happened was there was a show coming up and I needed to have work ready for the show. And I thought, well, I'll do something with these because they're important to me now, even though I don't know what to do with them. I'm going to use them. I had this bizarre frame that I got at a Goodwill, and somebody told me that it was a frame that had been modified for holding earrings or something. I don't know. But what I liked was the two different sizes of the caging on the frame. So I painted gold, got it all looking really Baroque, if you will. And started allowing things like safety pins to go through and make additional grids. I was kind of, for lack of a term, punning off of the idea of the way safety pins can hold something together, but when they're open, they're no longer safe. They almost look like little barbed wire pieces. The hair started getting caught in places, stuffed in holes. I decided to hang it coming out of the wall instead of against the wall, because I started thinking this is about something sifting, something grating, something separating people from other people. And the separation system is part of what this otherness is. Whatever we're deciding the border is, whatever we're deciding the criteria is for determining an otherness, it's happening at this place. And so I wanted something to kind of be this place through which things are passing. So this is what happened with the frame. On a totally unrelated, here's some of the hairballs. Let me back up here. On a totally unrelated, or seemingly unrelated at the time, I spill coffee all the time. I'm a klutz. And I had been soaking up the coffee with cosmetic pads and dyeing them with the coffee so as to not waste the coffee. But then I was peeling the paper off of the cosmetic pads, or the fabric off the cosmetic pads. And I had been doing another whole artwork that was just physical activity again, that was trying to center myself. And so I just opened my grandmother's sewing book, and it opened on how to tuck and pleat. And so I started doing it based off tuck and allow. So I was taking these pieces and doing pleating and tucking and making these little mini fiber sculptures, which I've done nothing with. I've got a couple hundred of those. They're in little boxes. I'll do something with them eventually. Anyway, during the process of dyeing those, I was using wax paper to roll the excess coffee out, and it dyed the wax paper. So I had all of these little prints of wax paper that were printed with spilled coffee that started looking like things to me. I was looking at them and they started looking like little funnels and teardrops. And I was thinking about and reading about the concerns about the development of the brains of these children who are being separated. And some of these started looking to me like brain scans with little holes in them, or things that weren't quite right. So I'm thinking again about this sorting system. I had some sentence paper from the paper we used to learn how to write cursive on. And I decided that it was part of, again, this sorting system. So I made files. I originally wanted to write on it, but I didn't know what to write on it. It was, what do I say, right? And I saw that there was, the lines, the blue lines and the blue dotted line. And again, to me, this was a boundary upon which expression could happen, but I didn't know what to express. So I started cutting them out and making little files. And the hair started going into the files. And I just started giving them numbers and ages, and started making these little files. So you can see some of them look like little dresses, some of them look like question marks, little flowers. One, it actually ripped in such a way that when I put them together, I saw the heart in the negative space. And I thought, oh, this is a special one, so this gets set separate. Okay, so you can see here several of the things. Okay, so there's a bunch of these. At some point during the process of trying to get ready for this show, I saw the color relationship between these, and I thought, what happens if they hang? My father, in his own hoarding, gave me this stamp, and it says American company on one side and made in the USA on the other. And it just happens to be stuck on let me find the stamp. Here it is. It happens to be stuck on XX received. I can't get it to move. And I thought, this is perfect. I'm just going to start stamping things that they've been received. Even if we don't know what to do with them, we just keep receiving them. And then questioning, are they really received if they're stuck, right? In the gallery, when I was putting the piece together, I just noticed, because I was down on the floor with all of these little balls, that there was a hole above the floorboard, and there was dust and debris and whatnot. And I started setting up these up so it looks like they're reaching into or coming out of that hole. And I wanted to encourage people to get down on their knees to look. So I took the sentence paper, and again, I didn't know what to say. So I started writing, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to say, I don't. And so when the exhibition had been put together, this runs along the baseboard for about 6 feet on the piece. The situation at the border continues. I continued to make balls. So there were many, many, many more of them. And what I started doing was separating them from ones that are darker and ones that are lighter. There are some that are technically blonder, some that are technically redder, and then some that are obviously would be related to people with darker hair. So this installation with the I don't know what to say, I don't, starts to separate the balls into color relationships that also show another sorting system that we're using for othering. Many of the tags started showing up over here. When I put this installation together, I didn't know what I was going to do with the tags yet. I started seeing a narrative develop on the tags. So let me back up so I can show you that. And I didn't notice it until I was actually trying to hang it. That these were the ones that all seemed to be closer to the brain development kinds of things, where there were holes and gaps. And I tried to glue them and move them so that they are interacting with those borders of the blue and the dotted lines. Then there was one that looks like the speech bubble or the apostrophe, and I don't know what to say, the missing O. Then there were several that looked like it was a disintegration. It looked like this could easily start to become this, could easily filter into this, and then drop. So what I did was arrange them. Find the arrangement, there we go. Arrange them in such a way, and of course the heart was the special one. So I put the heart as high as I could reach, so roughly, almost 6-7 feet, somewhere in that ballpark, standing on my tiptoes or a stool as high as I could get it up. And then started these in the kind of rhythm of what we would expect, and then let the others drop us down in through the funnel, down into the other space. So I was getting ready for this exhibition. I still didn't know what was happening other than I had tags and some hairballs. I still didn't know what I was saying. And someone had given me a bunch of audio tapes. And so again, I just needed some obsessive compulsive behavior to kind of deal with what I was dealing with. So I used gold ink and dipped my drawing pen in gold ink and wrote, I don't know what to say, I don't, on the audio tapes. I, again, wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I thought maybe if I attached them to these, they could somehow lead us down to the balls. While I was packing everything up, I was like, I had this piece of metal. I was still messing with the I don't know what to say, I don't. I was teaching drawing at the time. And so I had, and my dad had given me an old wooden kids print kit with the little wooden letters, right? I was just putting yellow tracing paper on it and rubbing graphite, because I was working with graphite with my students. And I noticed that the O would become really solid and kind of like two parentheses together. There was a gap, but it got really silver with the graphite, whereas the N and some of the other letters had been so worn from use that they always came out faint. The I and the N always came out a little faint and damaged because the thing I was rubbing against was damaged. I took some of the files and cut windows in them, put the I don't know what to say rubbings in the pieces. And then these are little tiny knots. There's probably 30 knots per, and you'll notice those are all blonde. Those are all the quote unquote ones that somehow are separated in another way from and elevated. And I was getting ready for the exhibition. I didn't know what to do with these either. The magnets came because I found this rusty piece of metal and saw that the rust echoed the colors of the balls. And also this like, great, this will start to pull it together. Magnets were easy enough. The audio tape is magnetized, so it was sticking to the magnets, so I could make that work. The typewriter came in at the very last minute simply because I was trying to pack this all up and I couldn't figure out how to display this. And I happened to be cleaning, and the only place I could set it up because it was drying, there was some stuff I was sticking to the back and it was drying, was to prop it on my little typewriter from the 1930s. And it looked great. I was like, okay, typewriter is part of the exhibition now. So I started typing. I don't know what to say, I don't. And that's how we ended up with this and the additional pile of I don't know what to say, I don't. So what we have is a kind of almost bureaucratic processing. And part of this is me processing as a witness. I feel like I'm a storyteller, but this isn't my story to tell. The only story I have is witnessing something and kind of just saying, okay, I'm the witness. I'm gonna do what I can in that position. I don't know that I feel necessarily empowered still. I'm sure there's more I could do, but it felt like what I could do at the time. Yeah. The other thing yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We have a couple folks asking similar questions about how important is it that the viewers understand the story and process that goes into these pieces? What do you want the viewer to take from it?
Well, you know, I'm always happy when someone just is pulled into it, whether it's the image or the materials or whatever. I mean, with the furball ones, I mean, you know, I know how many people have told me they just want to touch it, and I really want them to touch it, just like, because I think touch is part of it. But when I feel this way, and this is what I tell my students as well. We're creating contexts that interact with other people's contexts. So what I really want is for your context to meet this context and to see what discussion comes out of it. It's less you getting exactly what I think I'm saying, because I think oftentimes I'm asking more questions perhaps than I feel like I'm delivering a saying. I think I'm asking lots of questions around something and trying to figure something out myself. So for me, you know, if somebody just gets excited about a cute pink bird in a tutu and it just makes them laugh, I'm happy with that. If they had an experience learning ballet and was a klutz like me, you know, they may enjoy it on that level. I enjoy sharing the stories for me with them, but quite frankly, often when I revisit some of these collages or these artworks, even with my friends and we're talking, I see stuff in it that I didn't see before either. And it's kind of exciting to just see what other conversation comes out of it. So I'm happy if folks are even looking at this installation and are just saying, well, I don't know what to say either. It's like, yeah, okay, so we're meeting there right in the middle of I don't know what to say. It's also okay with me if they're just looking at it and say, wow, what a neurotic person to have written this many times and to have just made a whole bunch of little fur balls. And the ridiculous amount of labor that goes into that when there's probably easier ways of doing it.
Yeah, I think that sums up my experience with the piece too. I did read it differently, you know, than what you were maybe thinking about in at least in totality, right? But what you just shared reminded me of my conversation with the awards juror, and why he ultimately selected your piece for the prize was, even though he also felt like he didn't completely read what maybe you were saying with the piece, that challenge, like you said, I think at the very beginning and a couple times throughout our conversation today, the idea of posing those questions and asking, the viewer and you as the artist to engage with these questions and to challenge how we're reading or seeing something, really comes through with it. And I think for me, it's an enjoyable process, even when uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
To think through that and engage with and figure out how you relate with those different elements. So I guess thank you for that, for creating, ways to have that experience.
Well, I'm often suspicious of myself if I'm too comfortable making something. And I know some artists say that and it sounds really cheesy, but it actually is kind of easy to make a pretty collage. A lot of us are good at just taking imagery and putting it together, and it kind of comes out okay. I get more engaged when it's I'm not really sure what I'm doing. And there's a question here that I want to work on. I'm not sure what it is yet, but by making this, maybe I can ask the question, or maybe I can figure something out. And I think even when the work's done, I'm not totally sure I've figured it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're at time. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed the opportunity to see your work and hear you talk about it. I don't think I missed any other questions in the chat. So I guess with that, I'm just going to say thanks, guys.